Thank you for listening to Lone Star Community Radio. This program was broadcasted and recorded live from the LSCR studios in downtown Conroe, Texas. Lone Star Community Radio is supported by listeners like you. Donate and sponsor today. For more information on getting involved with Lone Star Community Radio, contact us at lscrstudios@gmail.com or visit us online at www.irlonestar.com.
You're listening to Crime Scene Today. I'm your host, Dan Zentek. We talk about issues current and future facing law enforcement, crime scene, and forensic investigations. Today with me, I have co-host Ryan Herring, and we're just going to talk about some of the current issues facing law enforcement. So Ryan, thanks for joining us today, and I'll switch that over there. We've been out for a little bit just because of different things with the radio station, and so we're getting back into the groove. I actually changed jobs and stuff, so took on some new roles there. You've taken on some new roles in not being in law enforcement anymore. But I know you have some great insight. How long did you do law enforcement, Ryan?
24 years.
So one of the things that one of the challenges, and I mean, it was before I went to my new employment, but even at the old employment and just in general, one of the issues going on is recruitment and actually people getting into law enforcement. And now both of our agencies were from southern United States and Texas area. In my area, we didn't have some of the similar problems that we're seeing in the north, such as the Seattle area, Chicago area, and that type of thing. So it wasn't so much that we didn't have community support where I was from, but still, as the national news would focus on those, you had people that were expressing that they didn't want to get into law enforcement, right? So we're seeing a lot less turnout at the academies is one problem. And I don't know which chief it was or sheriff that it was, and if I wish I did so I could give him credit for it, but made the comment that there's only so long that we can keep stealing officers from one another, that we still have this finite of officers that at some point, you know, if I take your officers, you take my officers, but I mean, we still just have this certain number, right? So it's getting people interested in doing this. And, you know, I've thought about that. I'm not real sure if it's, obviously, there's an impact to law enforcement. There's no doubt about that. But we also see just an impact in general to certain occupations. I mean, we've seen a decrease in truck drivers. We've seen a decrease in public servants all the way around, fire departments, other places, and just people turning more towards maybe technology and other things they're interested in. I mean, so I know in areas you came from, y'all had issues with recruiting. So what do you think are some of the problems? Where do you think we're headed?
I think some of the problems seem to be, especially around here, Central Texas and specifically Travis County, is you have officers that are, and there's a more nationalized sentiment to it as well, especially for the, like you mentioned, the news media that focuses on it, where it's turning cops into the bad guys. And if you can't come to work and expect to do your job, which can be a tough job, could be a dirty job in a sense, without fear of getting in trouble, going to prison for it, or getting indicted for it, I think that's a huge turnoff when you can go find something else, and the risk of going to prison is virtually zero. So I think that's a big turnoff as to why people are doing that is they want to do a good job, but then they see how they're portrayed by the media, and they're like, yeah, just take my talents someplace else.
Well, it's the one rare job that if you mess up, you can go to jail, right? I mean, most places you can get fired, you can get written up, you can get a deduction in pay, a demotion, those type of things. But it's the one thing where we're dealing with a person's rights. And so if we make a split-second decision and someone else judges that that's wrong, then we could be facing indictment, prison, and those type of things. I don't know many other professions that that's the case, right? Even medical, you have malpractice lawsuits, but I don't see many doctors that go to jail over it, right?
No, they pay their insurance and uh, go through their board steps, and then I'm assuming the majority of the time get reprimanded and then go back to their practice. So that is definitely unique, and in this job, we should take those things seriously within the corners of the Constitution and with policy and state statutes of what we're supposed to do and not supposed to do. But I think the challenge comes when not only just messing up, because most people in this profession, if they make a mistake, can own up to it. But where things are lawful and then it gets turned into something that it's not, I think that's where such a huge turnoff is, and that keeps people away from wanting to come into this profession.
The one thing that I found unique, and it seems more current. So recently, we've traveled to police academies to recruit, to have people come on. And what we've found is that where in the past you would have hundreds of applicants, if not thousands of applicants, and we're not seeing any. An example is we had, currently
Me.
for a point there, we had a point that 30 applicants show up after background testing and all the other stuff. We end up with like one or two, right? And so now that's something new. That's something that we're experiencing. We went to some academies to recruit, and nearly all of them, about 80%, they already had jobs. Like before they ever graduated, they already had jobs. So out of the ones that are left, for one, you sort of question the quality of the ones that are left, right? Who didn't pick them for a job, and then they know that they're a hot commodity. They can choose from pretty much any department and go on over there if they're qualified enough to do so. So it's challenging to not lower your standards to fill the spots, right? I mean, before you set high standards, and if you weren't in the top percentile, then you weren't getting on with the department. Now, as time goes on, how many openings do you have until you start lowering the standards to bring people on? And by doing so, the problems that come with us lowering the standards.
Right, and those kind of things aren't going to be seen till usually 5, 8 years down the line, once those standards get lowered and they get in, those recruits get in, get comfortable, get trained, and then you start seeing the decision making and potential ethical issues that come in from that. But I don't know. That's an interesting dilemma to solve, of needing bodies now, and then kind of hedging bets on what's going to happen 3, 4, 5, 8 years down the line.
Well, we've seen the results, and I hate to see them, but it's a live social experiment is what we're dealing with, right? So, we'll talk about Seattle in the sense that there's a talk of defunding and the police and people leaving and this type of thing. And, as far as the whole defunding police, I mean, the principle of it, I understand. The principle is that not everybody is a police action, right? There are things such as mental health and social services and these things that possibly could solve problems that police are currently responding to. The problem is those services are still not available. And I know that they see, well, if the police aren't doing it, then they don't need the money for it, but you haven't built those services to begin with. So in the meantime, you can't deplete the police force that's working those to try to build up. I mean, it's the only solution is you add more money to build those services. And I don't know, in the future, evaluate whether that has made an impact to law enforcement, that they're not having to respond, that you could decrease. But the current way that it seems to be rolling out is taking the money away to try to provide those services. And the end result that we're seeing is hundreds and hundreds of officers either losing their job, and then you have the fallback of that when those officers aren't there, but you need shifts covered, now you have people pulling overtime. Well, how many weeks are you going to work without a day off? How long is your family going to accept that you're at work day in, day out, and not actually having that work-life balance. And that sort of goes back to what you talked about earlier, is at that point, are you not looking for another profession, right? If that's happening across the board, then I can go somewhere else and actually get 2 days off a week, have some work-life balance, not have to work extra jobs, work overtime. But the social experiment that's happening up there and in some of the cities that we're seeing is beyond this lack of support for law enforcement, is we've seen nearly a legalization of certain criminal activities, right? And so now you have law enforcement that wants to do something in their city. They see crimes being committed. They see people being, stolen from and other issues. And the city or, district attorneys in their areas, they're not doing anything about it. They're not accepting charges, and this is a question I've had, and I think it's sort of a curious question, is, so we have laws on the books. If a DA decides that they will not prosecute for certain laws, is there any reprimand to the DA, or can a DA decide that in their jurisdiction, theft is legal, or prostitution is legal, or let's take it to the extreme, murder is legal, right? I mean, by their decision, what recourse, and I don't know what recourse you have when they say this particular thing, we're not going to do something about it.
Right. I think what we've, I worked for Austin PD for 24 years and inside Travis County, and we've had some interesting issues come up kind of as a result of that, from major stuff all the way down to what some consider nuisance crimes, criminal trespass, and look at what it goes beyond the prosecution, but look what's happening in Harris County with some of the violent crime as it relates to people that have been arrested for aggravated assault, robbery, even homicide, that are out on no or low bonds, that are committing more violent offenses up to additional murders. Now in Travis County, we haven't had that to the degree that Harris County is dealing with, but for us, it was a lot of criminal trespass, where it's a law in the books, but some in the community just don't like that particular law as related to transients, homeless folks downtown. They're coming into shops, clogging up the entrance, stealing things, knocking things over, making a mess of the store. And the county and district attorneys in Travis County were deciding on a percentage basis. I don't want to speak out of turn, but a percentage basis being at least middle of the road, that these were not in fact crimes. They were more cries for some sort of mental health help. And what we've found in Travis County is that DAs, and the way that the Texas statutes are written, is it's a really high bar to have any kind of sanction or liability hoisted onto the district attorneys. There's a term that gets thrown around, malicious prosecution. What exactly does that mean, and is it relevant in Texas? I don't know. But in Austin, there are 19 or 21 now officers that got indicted for responding to the riots a couple of years ago. And in looking at that, I'm privy to some of the facts with that, not all of them, but all of those were cleared by an internal review as being objectively reasonable. And then the district attorney presented at least 21. I think that there was more, because there was a few indictments that got no bill, but presented 21 cases to the DA, to the grand jury, and got indictments on them. And so as a result of that, there's been, the police association and others have looked into options, and really for DAs in Texas, the way the statutes are written, there's just not a whole lot of recourse with that, unless there's some sort of criminal act that occurs either through its, public integrity crime that the DA commits, or some sort of perjury or something like that. But and to your point of, the defunding, I think there are some that truly believe that taking funds away from cops for mental health services is a way to go. But I think being realistic, a lot of that, a percentage of that was looked at as punishment. Hey, let's just take the money and show the cops that this is we have the power to do this. Because in theory, yeah, it's great. Not everybody is a police response, but and in Austin, they've made some pretty good strides by having mental health call takers available in the 911 center. So someone and they've been able to divert actually a lot of police responses by just sending them over to a counselor on the phone. But when it comes to suicide attempts, some other mental health episodes where there might be some agitation, maybe some violence or threats, the cops still go to all of those. They're not taking any calls away from police at all. They just took money. And so there are some that were well intentioned, but others, I think it was just completely viewed as a punitive measure for that too.
Well, and I mean, you bring up some points in the fact that, and I hate to say it, is what it is that, DAs are an elected official, right? And so DAs are in response to voters, and as much as we would like to believe that they do not, and sometimes look towards that in making their decisions, but obviously they do. And so if you have a large outcry from your community saying that we want something done about the homeless, or we don't want something done about the homeless, then we're going to sort of see that in the priority of laws. And I mean, a balance of that, right? I mean, obviously, if the community's coming to you and saying, hey, these are problems in our community, then that is something that law enforcement and the DA is going to look into and try to address those specific needs of the community. But again, to what regard? You brought up the other point of Harris County, and that's an interesting conversation as far as, you have seen on the news many times where we have people that are committing murder, that are out on bond, that are out on this. And, in a previous show, we had talked to Montgomery County DA, and he explained to us in great detail as far as the problems in the overloaded courts. And so we talk about Montgomery County, which is way smaller than Harris County, being the third largest county in the nation, explaining that they'll have a couple of cases that are going to trial, and they're all three big cases. You may have sexual assault, a robbery, a murder, and only one gets to go to trial that day. Only one. The other two will have to be plea bargains. So you get to decide which one is going to go. Well, obviously we're doing the murder, right? And so, but if you were to focus on the others, well, the media could say they plea bargain this sexual assault, right? They plea bargain this. And even though right next to Harris County, we have Montgomery County that has large bonds and high sentencing and those type of things. But the one thing I'm curious about is in Harris County, being that large of a county, I know it's backed up, right? I mean, if we're talking about thousands of cases in Montgomery County, then we're talking about tens of thousands in Harris County. And yes, there's more courts. I mean, things are multiplied on both sides, but you only are allowed so many in the jail. You have a certain capacity before you have broken state standards. So who do you keep in? Who do you let out? And do we do, obviously we would love to say, well, nonviolent offenders, right? That's who we're going to kick out. And well, the low level drugs, we're going to kick those out, right? And we're just going to do violent. Well, that sounds great until we're back up with that, right? I mean, so what decisions are we making? And then, so you say, okay, well, it's his first time. He was in a family violence assault. He was in this. He knew the people. It wasn't to strangers. So this is one that is on that list, right? We have a protective order. We're going to let him back out on bond. He's not supposed to go back there, whatever. And then he goes back and he kills him, right? Because we've seen that. And it makes news headlines that we being as far as the DA's office, letting them out, the judge letting them out, these type of things. So I don't know the answer. I mean, I know that it comes across over and over of being lenient and these type of things. But again, I'm glad I'm not sitting in that chair either. I'm glad that I don't have the 10,000s of cases and deciding that this one gets a higher bond than this one, and this one is let out and this one's not. I mean, obviously, everybody would love the solution of either high bonds, no bonds, put them into a court, protect the community. But then there's the reality of the physical building that we don't have, right? We don't have the place to actually put them. And so at what point do we let violent offenders out? Because that's what we come up to, right? I mean, I know no different than you being in Austin. When I was working in homicide in Montgomery County, there were many times that murders didn't make the news. The only reason they didn't make the news is because they already had plenty of them in Harris County. They didn't need to drive down to Montgomery County to cover it, right? So it's a problem, and I don't know if it's increasing, but it seems like it is. It seems like that the violence seems to be happening more often. I don't remember as many just driving down the freeway and someone getting shot, right? And that being said, if we can see that there's an increase in violence, then we see there's an increase in violent arrest, and we still have no space for them. So, I mean, what's the options on that, right?
Yeah, it's a conundrum, and then what do you do? I mean, there's where some pre-conduct solutions would come into play to hopefully prohibit the crime from happening to begin with. But I mean, that's a very broad conversation of what do you do to get into communities to where these types of crimes aren't happening, whether programs or after school or whatever, community centers, to keep them from happening in the beginning. I know in Austin, one of the a very busy unit is the aggravated assault unit here in Austin. And quite frankly, the reason that there aren't any more the homicide rate isn't higher than it is due to officers responding, throwing tourniquets on, getting them to medical centers quickly, and then the great work of the doctors at the trauma centers around here.
Well, they've shown that over the years, the fact of the increase in technology and medicine, that are less people getting violent acts against them, or are we saving them, right? Has homicides really decreased, or are we just saving them?
No, I think it's we've had both. I mean, if you look at the number of actual homicides in Austin, it's we're all-time highs, which is not necessarily a record to be proud of. But then if you look at the number of aggravated assaults and shootings and stabbings and things that require and other trauma that require some major medical intervention, I think those are both up. And it's just fortunate that like many places, officers all carry tourniquets and chest seals and things like that. So there's a lot of on-scene trauma care being given. And then, a great job of Austin EMS and physicians around here that are saving that would otherwise people would be written off as having injuries incompatible with life. So that's interesting. I don't think it's not on a scale where one's up, one's down. They're both up. I think the percentage is down on people dying from getting shot, which is a great thing. But what the answer is, I don't know.
Well, it's complex. I mean, by all means. I mean, it's not how do you get someone to not enter the criminal justice system, right? How do we either give opportunities or address the issue or address the problems, and that leads to, and I'll scratch the surface because that's a whole conversation in of itself. But as we have these mass shootings and all these things, and then we see the behind the scenes, right? Oh, well, they had this red flag and they had this red flag, and most of the times when you actually listen to those red flags, meaning that you're hearing what they found, them in and of themselves, you would never have been able to act on, right? I mean, they were acting weird, they were withdrawn, they were, just different things that they find. But yeah, as once you see the end result of their horrendous act, then you start compiling it like, what could something have been done, right? And I think that goes sort of back, returning back to our conversation, is addressing the community of finding those mental illness, finding those that, are getting off track early on, and that then turns to the other conversation we were having is when you have that person starting to get off track, how harsh is the punishment? Do we let them back out because it's their first offense? Do we put them in some type of substance abuse? Do we put them in some type of anger management, some type of counseling? The end result, and I know that a lot of people by just the programs I just mentioned sometimes think that that's a soft approach, right? That no, lock them away, throw away the key, but the reality of it is they're getting out. They're gonna get out. Okay, no one's going away forever, except for some of the crimes you and I both work where there's a reason they're never getting out. But a majority are going to get out. So what do we do to make sure that once they get out that we haven't just put them in an environment that's just training them to be better at crime, be better at violence, to encourage their violence or whatever, right? I know that I can't imagine working in the Austin area with many of the things that y'all were dealing with, trying to satisfy police function, city leaders, and community that all seem to be at odds over accomplishing the same goal as everybody has, which is security for the community. Everyone wants to feel safe. Everyone wants to feel secure in their homes. They want to feel safe walking down the street, taking their kids to school. I don't know anyone that is in that situation that does not have, those beliefs, those reasons that we're out there to begin with as law enforcement. So, what exactly, I guess, what were conversations that you had as far as your, I mean, how do you take all that in and still function, I guess?
I think the hardest thing is, just in leadership in general is clear direction. And there was a lot of discussion on clear direction. You've got a policy for mobile field force or special response team or whatever it gets labeled for demonstrations and riots. You've got a policy that of course is a guideline that officers are told to look at, be familiar with, and then, hey, if these things start happening, here's in a sterile environment, we sat down, come up with this policy, and decided that these are the best ways to approach these type of events and keep everybody safe. We've talked about it, worked it out, talked about scenarios, run it through legal, and we've decided that these are the policies that we should follow and some of the tactics that need to be deployed in order to do that. And then when you have situations popping up and officers are being told not to intervene, it creates a little bit of confusion on what the mission, what the goals are in order to keep everybody safe. Don't let them take the street. Well, they took the street. Keep them away from the front of the police station. Well, they came to the front of the police station. Setting some things on fire. What do you do with that? Go out and grab this person. Well, maybe right now is not the best time to go out and grab this person. So there's a lot of ebb and flow, but I think the biggest thing was, and you had city leadership, and I've come to look at it with the police department as a subsidiary of the city itself, right? That's really what it is. It's just a subsidiary of the parent company, which is the city. And when you have city leaders, watching video and saying how horrible the police are doing, well, that filters down and sends messages to the command staff. Hey, we really don't like what you're doing. And then that filters down to the officers that are out there having to deal with it. And that's been a challenge. And the indictments, like I said, has come from those riots and those protests are what all these indictments at the DA's office are for. So there's a lot of stuff that can be flushed out over that in the coming years if it ever goes to trial. And there's a lot of debate on that. But I think clear direction is probably the biggest thing on what is it that we're trying to accomplish. What's the why? What's the main goal? And then empower your subordinates to actually make those decisions and not have to run every decision all the way up to the top, which of course creates bottlenecks, and then nothing gets done.
Well, and that's great leader before had said, you don't tell your troops what you want them to do. You tell them what mission you want to accomplish, and you let them accomplish that mission. They'll come up with things that you never dreamed of coming up with. And be able to bring that back. For one, you're creating new leaders. You're giving them the ability of the buy-in of them to own their decisions and to own the end results of those decisions. Over the years and in the past, when we need to get things done as law enforcement to accomplish a mission, normally you had a lot of support from your administration. Those were the ones that sort of, you took care of what was on the street, and your administration would explain to your city or your county or whatever why those steps were necessary. You always felt as though you were supported because they were the ones that had the mission, right? And it seems as though more recently that we're having agencies that's not the case. We're having agencies that whether the communication is failing, whether it is not being explained or no one wants to hear, I couldn't tell you the one or the other, but I can tell you that there seems to be a disconnect from that support and a focus on completing the mission, right? I mean, if your thing is they don't take the street, well, then they don't take the street, right? I mean, if you got to bring out the van and you start hauling them away and people get upset that they're hauled away, the thing they don't realize is that, initially it's, oh, well, you're violating the rights. They had a right to be out here where, we're stopping it before it gets to the point where we have to act even more, that there's more force being used, right? That it's something simple. You can't block the roadway, so let's start with there, right? Let's just remove this peaceful protest, all about it. Stay over there, yell, scream, hold your signs, don't hurt anybody, and we're great, right? That's one of the great benefits of being in this country, but once you start taking over private property, causing damage, causing injury, and we see that coming. We've done this for years to know, okay, we're starting to head that way. Let's curb this before they're at the front of the police station. Because at what point does it stop, right? At what point, okay, well, don't let them in the lobby. Well, don't let them on the elevator. Don't let them in the,
You're 100% right. There were what seemed to be a tide turner with the protest here was all those things that you just said. There was enough push by the right people, or should I say, the right people heard the push to where they, all right, you know what? I think this has gone on long enough. And then once that kind of clear delineation started happening, hey, if they take the street, they're not going to do that, and we're going to respond and react accordingly. The being in this country, free speech, right? Well, for one of the tactics used for a while was to have officers on the front steps of the police station. In that, protesters were using a PA, bullhorn, megaphone, whatever you want to call it, and then getting in officers' faces with it. Well, and that was just seen, well, it's just a city ordinance violation, so don't worry about it. And well, really, if that can cause hearing protection, hearing loss, it started being looked at as an assault. They're right in your face using something that's causing you bodily injury. But the optic of it, if you snatch this bullhorn, this PA out of somebody's hand, well, then that gets everybody stirred up. And I think that's there's a place for optics, absolutely. Whenever you can do something and keep in mind the optics, then I think sometimes we're better for it. But sometimes, as the cliche goes, no one likes to see sausage get made, and sometimes you have to respond violently to acts. And the notion of a fair fight, the fair fight does not exist in the law. There's no statute. There's no case law that says that officers have to be fair. They have to be objectively reasonable, and then for the department standard, act within active in their department. But I think sometimes the optics is what puts us behind the curveball. And in my own experience, sometimes seeing some things, we had a protester that was shot one night. It was actually my first couple of nights down after I promoted to lieutenant. And so it was a welcome to downtown of having to deal with not only a protest, but then a protester that took over the street and ended up getting shot by a motorist. And these things, the optics are not good. But ahead of time, they were down there with rifles, and at the time, police department didn't have anybody down there with matched firepower. It was all worried about SR or make sure we have riot gear, stay in the back. And the optics of having officers down there and able to respond with AR-15s was looked at something we don't want to do because, well, it just looks aggressive. And, the national debate over AR-15s. Turns out later on that night, he pointed at somebody, allegedly, and he was killed for it. And thank God he didn't decide to turn that on, or some of the other guys that were down there with AR-15s and AK-47s didn't decide to turn that against the police. And I believe their comment was, if we turn this to the police if we turn our guns toward the police, they're going to kill us. And so there was at least a little bit of fear there, but the optics kept a response, and it was a little bit of a challenge to start rounding up people that have that gear, that have the active attack training, and kind of stage them for a quick response, all because of how it would look with AR-15 slung and how the crowds would respond to that. And that's an interesting balancing act.
Well, and actually, what I find sort of ironic about it is that the reason that we carry AR-15s to begin with, comes out of history, and it comes out of Austin, right? We talk about the UT Tower shooting, in which someone had a rifle, and all the officers had handguns, and no one could get to them. I mean, many years ago, and I'm not saying that that's the AR-15. No one handed out AR-15, but it was an acknowledgement that we were outgunned, we were outmanned, and there have been many instances since then. But that was a big case in Austin that drove police to start realizing that, as you said, there's not something as a fair fight. We can't show up with our handguns while they have a rifle and go, like Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd saying, "Time out. I got to go get the right one, and I'll be back."
Let's do our 10 paces and then turn so that we can make sure that this is fair for everybody.
Right. So we've adjusted over the years, and one of those adjustments is that we put the proper tools in police hands, and really it's a reaction to whatever we're facing. Right. If for the most part, if you're not bringing rifles to it, we usually don't just hop out with rifles in our hand and go running after somebody. If we believe there's a threat that they can have a long rifle that we would be up against, or they have body armor that pistols would not stop, then we're going to break out the right tools that we can protect ourselves, the citizens, and other officers. But yes, it looks very military, right? Because it is. It's as simple as that. When other people have those type of weapons, we're having to fight against that. I find it sort of odd when you look at other places, where it's common. If you go in other countries that's at the airport, they have AR-15 slung, they have assault rifles at their security checkpoints. It's not thought of anything. We think about it because it's just not, I guess, normal here. It's not seen, but it's normal in other places. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's just putting in place the things that are needed at that time.
Oh, sure. You have, New York, Times Square, officers are patrolling Times Square with AR-15s all the time. And then, DPS at the Capitol from time to time would just, hey, it's my turn. I'm going to go grab and I may not have this exactly right, but they would have AR-15s where some would carry them all day. Some would go, all right, I'm going to go grab my AR and walk around for a little bit. And what has gotten a lot better with Austin Fire, Austin EMS, Austin PD is the active attack unit, the coordinated active attack unit they have. where you've got medics, firefighters, and police officers downtown on weekend nights, ready to respond. Everyone's got AR-15s and heavy vests because of the number of shootings that have occurred down in the downtown area, and where again our public safety partners with fire and EMS and with the police officers that were there were instrumental in keeping casualty counts as low as they were. One's terrible, but they definitely could have been a lot more. And that's something where the perception has been a little bit set aside and more looked at as this is just necessary. This is a tool. We've got the documented history of shots down here, people getting shot down here, multiple people getting shot down here, and this is just the right tool for it. So that's something they've done a really good job with.
Well, as far as the impact, the current impact and ongoing impact, and that's the part that surprises me, right? The current, I guess, change in the Austin, Travis County area of people quitting, losing officers. I mean, they're behind on getting officers. Is the impact to the tourism in Austin that I have no doubt, there's been a decrease in money, that's coming in there. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still conventions, still people that go there, but I mean, just my opinion, you are from there, can tell me, but I don't believe that the tourism is to the level of hitting 6th Street and all the areas as it used to be because of that.
6th Street is interesting right now because COVID did wipe out a handful of bars that were there. And whereas it used to be numerous blocks, maybe 5 up to 6 blocks of clubs on East 6th Street, it's really about 1.5 is the concentrated. Yeah, it's 1.5 blocks. I mean, there are bars that span more than 1.5 blocks, but the true concentration of people occur in about 1.5 blocks. Which is also where the shootings have occurred that have actually had victims. Now you have other areas. Rainy Street is pretty busy. West 6th Street is pretty busy, but the East 6th Street of old is definitely different. Now it does seem that tourism, I mean, the conventions and things are back up. Lots of conventions that are coming to town, but there's also been several conventions that have pulled out due to public health and public safety and crime issues too, where they've written letters and say, hey, we don't feel that bringing our people here are safe anymore downtown, since the convention center is downtown, just runs to about 4th Street, and it's 2 blocks away from 6th Street, where almost every weekend, non exaggeration, there's shots fired at night.
Well, I know in the past, I mean, they would shut down ends of it. There was a large police presence. I mean, it was, seemed very relatively safe to go down and have a nice time and go on your way. The biggest problem you usually had was a couple of people getting drunk that behave badly when they get drunk, and they know that. And now, it's one of those things that whether clientele, the people that are willing to go down there, but it seems like you hear more violence that's going on, and so at that point you decide to go somewhere else, which is sad because growing up in Texas, that was always a place to go, that you could listen to some amazing music and some talent that was coming up and coming, and it seems as though that's gone away, and I think that's the impact that we're talking about these, what I can sort of consider these social experiments that are going on throughout our country. One that I find it sad, but I find it interesting to see the results, and I'm waiting to see what those end up being, is like Portland, that has decided that small amounts or usable amounts of cocaine, heroin, meth, and such is either $100 fine or go to some treatment. And again, I think I understand the thought process is that we want to get them treatment, but from my experience of years in law enforcement, what I found is if someone doesn't want help, it doesn't matter. They're not going to benefit from the treatment, right? And I also know many that they just pay the $100, and so at that point you've taken this dangerous drug, And we've seen the results in Seattle and Portland, and the reaction of the community, the reaction of homelessness, and the job rates and those things. And again, I can't imagine being an officer from that area, literally just walking by people dealing drugs, shooting up, using different illegal narcotics. And I'm not talking about smoking marijuana. I'm talking about, hard stuff, and just walk by because you've been told don't enforce it. And again, I sort of refer it back to a social experiment. I'm curious to see what happens with them mandating treatment and those type of things. But just from my years, I'm pretty sure how I think this is going to end up. And we've sort of seen so far some of the consequences from those decisions. But we've also seen a huge avalanche effect of officers leaving because they're not allowed to do their job. And now you're starting to see the impact of not only the drugs and crime, but what happens when there's no one there to provide that safety.
I mean, I think we're on the same page of where it's going to go. What's happening in some places is you have elected officials like a district attorney, and in Travis County, you have the district attorney that deals with felonies and public integrity crimes. And then you have the county attorney that deals with misdemeanors. So you've got these two separate entities looking at different levels of offense, both who are saying, yeah, this is an offense under the state statute, but we think it's better served someplace in some other way. So we're just going to reject the affidavit, reject the charges, not really say we're not going to prosecute, but we're not going to prosecute. Right. And so you have you have police departments that have policies about felonies occurring in their presence and drug use and what to do, and then DAs saying, hey, if you arrest somebody with a crack rock, just know we're not going to do anything with it. And so then you get into this philosophical debate over you're statutorily allowed to make this arrest because it's still a crime, but the DA has made it pretty clear that they're not going to prosecute. So is it worth making that arrest? I mean, that's an interesting debate, especially if you end up getting into an altercation with someone, end up hurting them or get hurt, knowing that charges are going to be filed on them anyway. No, not going to go anywhere anyway. And then, are they likely to take any kind of resisting offenses because it started out as something they're not going to prosecute anyway? I would say that that's a really low likelihood. So the only person that's opened up to any kind of scrutiny really is the officer for making that arrest that he's been kind of maybe not through the department because the department's hey, this is still a law on the books, but just know this is what the DA says about it. So that's a hard balance to walk on, not only for a department, but for officers who are seeing things that they know are violation of the law, but have been pretty clearly indicated by the county and the district attorney's office that they're just not going to prosecute for those.
Well, and I think that leads back to what we were talking about with what we've seen in Seattle is officers just walking by, right? Not even interacting, not even, having more of a conversation about it because, again, why? Why would I go over, possibly get stuck with a needle, get in a fight, go through all this when the end result and how it's been described by some officers is why would I do it if the community doesn't care? If you don't care about it, why am I out here killing myself, doing these things, right? And again, whether that's a reaction from the community, whether it is a reaction of minimizing the amount of cases, whether it is trying to find another solution, because we feel that incarceration and the criminal justice system is not the solution to that particular issue. I don't know. As we said, that's a much bigger and broader conversation, which we are going to continue to have numerous conversations on that and on other topics and things. We're going to wrap up today, and I appreciate Ryan for joining me, as he's agreed to co-host the show and be here on a couple of occasions to talk about different topics. And I appreciate your wealth of knowledge and certainly just the different areas that we work and different years that we've served. We hope that we can share some of that information that benefit other areas. And as the media throws things out there, one of the reasons for the show is not only to have subject matter experts on to talk about current issues facing law enforcement, forensics, crime scene investigations, but it's to actually share that from a law enforcement point of view, things that we've dealt with from just experience, and to share those things, to bring up new topics, and share that not only with our law enforcement, with our community. So Ryan, thanks for joining me, and for listeners out there, we will be bringing you another show soon. Make sure you check your calendars, depending on what area of law enforcement you possibly are in. You have the Crimes Against Children Conference that is happening in Dallas. That's going to be in August. A huge conference. If you've never gone and you deal with crimes against children, you need to make that a point of your career. It is huge. It is beneficial. You have the IAI for Crime Scene Investigators International Conference is happening also in August. That one is in Omaha, Nebraska this year. Registration is still currently going on. And for those that are dealing with property and evidence, you have Tape It that's going to be coming up in October. So make sure that you register for that. And if you are a leader in law enforcement, the International Association of Chief of Police Conference, that is going to be in Dallas this year, also in October. So all those conferences coming up. COVID seems to have lessened to where people are willing to have these in-person conferences. We can network again and share our information and just benefit from the knowledge of others, and we look forward to it. So thank you for tuning in.